Hi, everybody. Joe Mifsud with Oxford. Before we get to the presentation, just wanted to apologize for the technical issues that we were having during the Mega Education Day. Um, Here, I thought it would be efficient for us to all record our parts separately and then consolidate. However, replaying that video over Teams just wasn't working. So my apologies for that. I certainly didn't mean to waste anybody's time. Um, but the rest of this video will be its presentation in its entirety. And if anyone has any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to reach out directly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session all about bids. This course is designed to walk you through practical tips on the bidding process, help you feel more confident with procurement, and ultimately make decisions that are clear, fair, and fiduciary sound. Today's session is presented by Oxford Companies. Today's presenters are Joe Mifsud, President, Mike Van Patten, Director of Commercial Property Management, and myself, Lorenzo Rivera, Director of Construction. Here's what we'll cover today. We'll start with your fiduciary role in procurement. We'll dive into creating a clear scope and kicking off a proper RFP. Then we'll decode how to compare bids, making sure you're not stuck comparing apples to chainsaws. Finally, we'll finish with best practices of communicating with vendors, and we'll save some time at the end for your questions. Who is this session for, you might ask? Anyone issuing bids, anyone evaluating proposals, and anyone responsible for vendor selections. We're assuming that most of you here today are either involved in issuing bids, evaluating vendor proposals, or approving vendor selections. How many of you have ever received a bid and thought, man, this is either way too good to be true or way too confusing to trust? When you're involved in procurement, you're a fiduciary for your company, meaning you have a duty to act in its best financial and operational interests. That means fairness, transparency, and avoiding even the appearance of favoritism. Procurement rule number one, it's not about picking who brought you the best donuts, it's about who brings you the best value. Defining the scope of work and initiating an RFP. A strong scope of work is the backbone of a good bid process. When vendors clearly know what you want and by when, you'll get more accurate, comparable proposals. Reading and comparing bids. We want to make sure that we have an apples to apples comparison. We want to watch for hidden costs or assumptions, and don't just pick the lowest price. When bids come in, you want to make sure you're comparing like items. Apples to apples, not apples to small angry pineapples. Check for assumptions, exclusions, and any hidden costs. Remember, the lowest price isn't always the best value. Vendor communication. Set the tone clear and professional. Provide updates during the evaluation process. Always send a formal award or rejection notice. Communication is key. Treat all vendors with respect and consistency, even if they're not ultimately selected. A clear yes or no builds your organization's reputation for fairness and professionalism. So, before we jump into the technical side of bids and procurement, I want you to think about this. Every bid you touch is more than just a transaction. It's a reflection of your judgment, your ethics, and your commitment to doing things the right way. The decisions you make have an everlasting impact, not just on budget spreadsheets, but on the quality of the work delivered, the strength of the partnerships formed, and the reputation of your organization as a whole. Procurement is where strategy meets integrity. Think about that. Procurement is where strategy meets integrity. Our goal today isn't just to teach you on how to check the boxes, it's to empower you on how to make smart, transparent decisions that stand the test of time. Enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Lorenzo. And thank you, BOMA, for having us here today. I know fiduciary responsibilities and bidding and RFPs and communication aren't the sexiest topics, but the process overall is one that I think most of us struggle with from time to time, and it's a great opportunity to provide some insight into how things should be done to hopefully make your jobs a little bit easier and maybe your owner is a little bit happier. So let's start at looking at what fiduciary responsibilities are before we dive too much into the bidding process itself. Fiduciary relationship is one in which one party is entrusted to act in the best interest of another party. Some common examples include a trustee beneficiary, attorney-client, a corporate board and their shareholders, an agent principal, and like most of us, a property manager and property owner. While there are several duties that are expected of these relationships, the core really comes down to two main duties, and that's the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. The duty of loyalty requires that the fiduciary act in the best interest of another party, even if it's at the expense of their own interests. Again, in our case, this is going to be the property owner for most of us. An example of this might be finding lower bids for a project that we're running. Most management agreements are set up such that these projects are billed based on a management fee of a percentage of the project. So every dollar we save the owner, it's ultimately costing us money out of our pockets. Nonetheless, fiduciaries, property managers, are expected to base our actions around the beneficiary's best outcome, which is going to be the lowest price, but also a good end product. The other key element is the duty of care. This requires a fiduciary to exercise care and skill of a prudent person familiar with the matter, which may include conducting research and seeking out expert advice where it's needed. Again, in a project, maybe we're bringing in a consultant to round out some of the technical information that might be a little bit outside of our expertise. We also might exercise this by making sure we're fully informed of a situation prior to making a decision or a recommendation to our owners. Now, some other duties that are expected of fiduciaries include the duty of good faith and fair dealing. This requires the fiduciary to act honestly, with good intention, integrity, sincerity, and objectivity in all matters of the relationship. An example of this might be awarding or recommending a job get awarded to the lowest bidder despite having a better personal relationship with a different vendor. Then there's the duty of confidentiality. That requires fiduciaries to keep information obtained as part of their relationship confidential unless it's authorized by the beneficiary or it's legally required to be shared. This can include things like just keeping the owner's financial information private. Then we've got the duty of disclosure. This requires fiduciaries to make the beneficiary aware of any potential conflicts of interest that may affect their decisions or recommendations. It also requires us to keep our owners aware of the goings-on at the property. An example of this might be informing them of a lawsuit brought against the property by a visitor rather than just attempting to provide resolution. Keep in mind, these are not just expectations of the role in the relationship, these are legally and ethically binding. Failure to abide by these can have far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. Some legal consequences are that the individuals, as well as the employers, may be sued for breach of fiduciary duty, even if that duty was unintentional. This can result in contract cancellation, liability for damages, and more. There may be financial consequences. This could include additional fines and penalties that could be levied, profits that may be ordered to be returned, and loss of clients. Professionally, you could be terminated from your position and you could have any licensing revoked. For me, that would include something like my real estate salesperson license. It also includes broker's license and any certifications and licensing that go along with our trades that are also part of BOMA. Then there's reputational damage. There's a potential for permanent damage to your reputation and credibility, which potentially affects your future employment opportunities. There are industry standard practices And we're typically using those as a barometer for comparing whether action taken was prudent or not. This could include things like obtaining 3 bids or disclosing personal relationships with vendors to your owners or getting your approval in writing. Beyond that, always consult your management agreements for what's expected of your service in that situation. Those agreements should spell out the terms and conditions pretty clearly. It includes things like the dollar amount that the property manager can approve in non-emergency situations, how many bids are expected, how the recommendations should be presented, what even constitutes approval of a project, expectation in emergency situations, and more. Now, what are some good practices that we can put in place that might not necessarily immediately come to mind when we're thinking about these things? Well, number one, maintain documentation. This ensures accountability for all parties, as well as provides transparency and protection for everybody involved. This can include saving the bids, saving the RFPs, saving approval and getting written approval from your owners when you're moving forward with the project. Make sure that it's all there in writing so that you can go back and look at it later if needed. Making sure our decisions are based on merit and data and are objective. Ideally, we're able to fall back on written policies and agreements too. Some companies may implement checklists or decision-making matrices, as well as interpersonal actions, such as consulting an unbiased third party for their objective input. You also want to make sure you're staying informed of the ever-changing world around us. Local, regional, national regulations change quite frequently. Court cases are being decided daily that have the potential to affect your business. Technologies are constantly advancing. Those can affect our standards of practice. Making sure that you're staying in the know can ensure that you're always actively managing your relationship, providing the best service to your clients, and really owning the fiduciary aspect of your job. We also want to make sure that our processes are documented, defensible, and repeatable. I think we've all heard advice around tough communication, something to the effect of, if you're unsure how something may come across, imagine yourself sitting in a courtroom with someone reading back your comments to a jury you don't know in an unemotional tone with no context, no nonverbal communication, no background of you or the situation, just the words. The same logic sort of applies here. Can you sit in front of an auditor or a board and defend your actions and feel good about it? They're not going to have the background. They're not going to know your history with the company or the project. All they're going to see is on the paper who you move forward with, who you recommended. If you're not, it's likely not a good idea. You probably want to take a step back and reevaluate. Thank you. Now over to Joe.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Joe Mifsud. I've been working in property management since 2001, and the subject of bidding, request for proposals has been part of my career ever since. I'm sure, like all of you. And what I've learned over that time is that when this process executed well and a solid scope of work is created, it will prevent frustration and aggravation when it comes to finally having to make a recommendation to your client. And as a side note, Mike didn't think that people would get the connection here with the pig. But I have more faith in my fellow man. Moving on, let's start with the scope of work. This is the backbone of the entire bidding process. It's going to tell vendors what you want done, where you want it done, how you want it done, and what the final deliverable should look like. If your scope of work is vague, expect confusion, inflated costs, probably change orders, and mismatched expectations. If it's tight, clear, bids come back cleaner, more accurate, and far easier to compare to one another. Strong scope of work should include the project background. Why is this work needed? the objectives, what outcomes are we all aiming for, specific deliverables, detailed descriptions of what must be provided. Work locations include any access limitations or logistics issues, building hours, freight elevator hours, um, when loud noise can be done in the building, when it can't be done, fire alarm testing, all those types of things. Timeline, start and end dates, key milestones, materials and responsibilities, who provides what? Is the vendor using the building's dumpster or trash receptacles, or is that something that they're expected to provide on their own? Assumptions or exclusions, what's not included? Every one of these items will minimize the ambiguity. Vendors don't like guessing because they don't know what their competitors are guessing, and neither do we. All right, let's talk about what we want to avoid in a scope of work. Too much jargon or internal language, acronyms that are only known by you and your coworkers. If you've been working at a particular place for a good amount of time, we often use these acronyms without even knowing it. So just be conscious of that. Remember, the vendor isn't going to speak your lingo. If anyone out there has ever done or reviewed a request for proposal from the United States government, you are familiar with this frustration. You need a decoder ring to understand those sometimes. So let's not leave people guessing or confused. Unclear timelines, vague deadlines is going to equal vague pricing. For example, a number of years ago, we had provided what we thought was a pretty good scope of work for a roof replacement, and we had started soliciting bids, I think early in the year, January, February, to get it done in that summer. And one bid was the clear winner. The price was right. Scope we thought was the same. However, they were not able to do the job until the late fall, whereas the other bidder was counting on doing it in the spring, which is what was needed. So just the clarity up front on the timeline will help. And then just an example here, putting something in a scope of work, such as install new flooring, not the way to go. Be clear with what you're expecting, and it will make the process for your vendor much clearer, and hopefully you'll be able to get those proposals back more timely. What if I'm not qualified in the subject matter to write a good scope of work? This is a good one. This is a big one, because if you are like me, a property manager at heart, I'm not an expert really at anything. I am okay at a lot of different things. I can hold my own, but when it comes to writing the scope of work for a 1,000-ton chiller replacement, I'm not your guy. So what you need to start with is understanding what your client's objective is. Let's say we're talking about a parking lot replacement. Let's say your client is a bank. It's a receivership property or REO property, and the objective of your client is to unload that property as quickly as possible. So they are looking to put lipstick on a pig here and not spend a great deal amount of money. They want it to market well and sell. So we're talking about the difference of perhaps simply doing it, either seal coating it or a mill and cap, versus the owner or the client who has long-term hold interest in their property and wants the job done right. So you're probably in that situation going to want to invest in an engineer to develop your scope, unless you have an internal department that can do that for you and has that expertise. They will usually provide the Cadillac option, and something that they are willing to stamp and seal with their name on it, that this is the right fix for the problem. You can request help from a vendor. I would just tread carefully here and just be open and honest with that vendor. There's nothing wrong with asking a vendor to provide a proposal on what they believe is the right fix for your circumstances, and asking them if it would be okay to use this scope of work that they created for their own bid to solicit other bids. Again, I would always get their permission in these situations. They don't want to find out that you're using their material. They're the ones that put the time into developing that scope and then just handing it out to other vendors. The benefit for them is that they're going to know that the other vendors, contractors bidding are going to be bidding apples to apples because they developed the scope. But again, just be open, honest, transparent with the vendor up front that is the intention. Requesting help from a fellow BOMA member. Remember, we're an association. We're here for each other. There are times when I reach out to people I know that are part of BOMA with questions. If you don't know who to go to, reach out to a BOMA board member, reach out to Rick Troy. He has the perspective, probably the best perspective. He has a handle on our full membership. He knows what everyone does, so he's a great resource. So let's use each other. We sometimes forget that much of what we all do day to day is nothing new. Someone's done it before, likely. So let's use each other. So now that we covered the importance of defining the work, we're going to shift to the RFP process as a whole, how we ask for the bids. It's more than just a document. It's a tool to gather the consistent and competitive qualified responses that we are going to want. The goals of the RFP process are pretty simple. We want to level the playing field. We want all the vendors bidding on the same scope of work and in the same circumstances. We want to get accurate pricing, no fluff, no guessing. We want to identify the best partner, not just the lowest price. Sometimes you want the best value, which doesn't always mean the lowest price. And we want to reduce back and forth, minimize the clarifying questions that delay the timeline. The RFP is both an invitation to bid and a filter. The complete RFP typically will include an introduction, a high-level summary and overview of the project. It'll include the scope of work that you've developed. It'll include proposal requirements. What must the vendor include in their response? The schedule, cost breakdown, certifications, references. Are there any forms that you want them to fill out? Evaluation criteria. How will you be deciding who wins? Submission instructions, deadlines, formats, who to contact, how do they submit their bid, where do they submit a bid? Terms and conditions, insurance requirements, contractual language, etc. You want to put that stuff in up front. You don't want to ultimately get a great bid back from somebody who isn't able to execute your contract or isn't able to obtain the insurance coverage that you require. The typical sequence of the RFP process. Once you have everything together, you will distribute, email, or post your RFP package. You'll hold a pre-proposal meeting with the interested parties. You'll perhaps have a site walk, if applicable, or perhaps the pre-proposal meeting is held at the site. Then a deadline for question submission. You want to outline clearly that you want all of the questions from the various interested parties to come in a certain by a certain date, and then you're going to redistribute those questions with their answers to all the parties, and then ultimately your proposal submission. And that pretty much wraps it up. After the next couple of sections, we will open up some Q&A. So if there's any questions on this topic, be happy to hit them then.
Now that the proposals are in, we shift to the most critical part of the process, reviewing and comparing them fairly and accurately. This section focuses on tools and strategies to help you evaluate bids side by side and make informed, responsible decisions. The key points here are to make sure you challenge inconsistent formats, unclear assumptions, and prices versus value. Your subcontractors are going to prepare their bids or proposals in the best manner that they know how. They're going to itemize what they think is important, and they're going to qualify what they think doesn't pertain to them. So it's going to be important for you to go back through and review all of those items because different vendors are going to prioritize different things. So you want to make sure that you have all of the points covered, and you want to itemize to what you feel is important, to what you think is going to be the most value to the project that you're running. Remember, it's your project, not theirs. The objective here is to avoid bias, confusion, or incomplete comparisons. We'll use simple tools like matrices and clear evaluation criteria. Our goal here is to make confident decisions that are backed by facts, not just impressions. Don't be afraid to challenge and to call them back or to reach out to them to ask them to reformat their proposal. In the end, it's going to work out best for both parties. They will have gone through and taken a closer look at the items, maybe breaking them apart to fall into the format that you need, and you will have a complete understanding of what they are trying to propose. One of the easier ways to compare bids is to use a comparison matrix. A comparison matrix is straightforward. It's a visual tool that helps evaluate multiple bids and consistent criteria. It removes guesswork and creates a level playing field. What I like to do in this case is create a simple matrix either on paper or in Excel, something that you can list the key points and items that you make sure you don't want to miss and how much they cost in comparison to the other vendors. Put vendors across the top, criteria down the side. We want to use visuals like check marks or a grading scale 1 through 5, color coding. You'll figure out the best way that works for yourself. It forces consistency in what you're reviewing. So you're definitely going to be comparing that apples to apples that we've been talking about. It makes it easier for you to present and to justify your selection. It also makes sure that you don't miss anything along the way. Be sure to list your critical factors like price, deliverables, timelines, and other references. You want to make sure that the references include all the data that's available for the job and to detail out an accurate price, whether it's specifications, drawings, sketches, or simple conversations that are documented. Just make sure that you have everything covered and that all of your criteria are met. Remember, not all bids are created equal. There are often hidden or unclear elements that can trip up even the most experienced reviewers. Here are some things to watch out for when digging into the details. You want to make sure you're looking for hidden costs or exclusions. Things like freight, overtime, permits, the size of the crew members involved, and how many crews are going to be on. Just make sure that you understand where they're coming from with their pricing. You also want to make sure that the entire scope is understood. Make sure the vendors know whether or not they're supplying materials or providing labor or both. Sometimes it can be unclear in the data, and you'll have to go back and make sure that you are providing the correct information. You want to understand from your subcontractors whether they will be providing the work in-house or if they're going to farm it out. Farming out work means that they're going to subcontract out to a third party and they will monitor their progress that way. Sometimes that costs a little more money from the contractors that are actually going to do the work in-house. Also important to look out for is after the project, what's their warranty like? How is the service going to be for that particular scope of work? Are they going to slap their hands, shake off the dust, and leave the site never to be seen again? Or are they going to stand behind their work? If there are any issues, come back and make sure everything is detailed out. Subcontractors that offer those services are invaluable, and you definitely want those kinds of people on your jobs. Make sure you're looking for red flags on the proposals. Vague language like TBDs or multiple assumptions, those are usually indicators that maybe that they don't have all the answers to their questions, or maybe they haven't done enough research. Those may result in lower bids in the forefront in the review process, but in the end cost you more money by change orders or asking for clarifications that result in additional work for that contractor or another contractor. It's easy to get distracted by the lowest price, but you need to make sure that you're really comparing equal proposals. Here's how to level the playing field. Some of the points you want to cover are making sure you're asking those clarifying questions when bids don't line up. Compare the total cost of ownership, not just the initial pricing. Look at value adds, experience, quality, responsiveness. Evaluate based on your priorities. What's your timeline? How durable is the product? What's the post-sale service? Don't penalize detail. A more thoughtful bid might look expensive, but actually save you time and risk. Let's walk through a common example in commercial construction where two bids look similar at first glance, but the details tell a much different story. Bidder A submits a bid for $250,000. This bid includes permit acquisition and associated fees, temporary power and water setup, full construction site cleanup and debris removal, 1-year workmanship and materials warranty, coordination with other trades, electrical, mechanical, fire suppression, and weekly project meetings and proactive communication. On the surface, it seems to be an incredibly put together bid, and there's a lot of value there. Bidder B comes in at $25,000 less than bidder A at $225,000, but they exclude permits and inspections, temporary utilities. They assume that they're already in place, no cleanup, post-construction cleaning is excluded, warranty is only 90 days, coordination with trades is not included, so you risk the scope conflicts there, and there's no structured progress reporting or meetings. Up front, bidder B being 25 grand cheaper looks like there's some value there, but once you pay for the permits and the permit and utility setups, can contact a third party to handle cleanup, spend internal time resolving trade coordination issues, take on risk for inspection delays, change orders, and or missed handoffs, and you face warranty risk past 90 days, your actual cost could expose you in excess of $270,000. So it's important to dig down into the details and make sure that there's a full understanding of how they relate to the other contractors on your project. Bidder B didn't just get cut the costs, they cut scope. That missing scope doesn't disappear, it just gets handed off to you. Always ask, what risk or responsibilities is this bid shifting to us? The bid review process is where your decision has the most impact. Being organized, asking questions, and looking beyond the bottom line ensures that you're getting the best deal, not just the cheapest one. So in closing, let's review some of the key coverage points that we discussed in this session. Number one, make sure you use a structured method in evaluating bids and proposals. Matrices help with consistency. Number two, clarify gray areas before making a decision. Number three, focus on long-term value, not just short-term costs. 4, good vendor decisions protect your time, budget, and credibility. And number 5, be a responsible steward for your organization's resources. Thanks again for your time. We'll now move on to the next section.
Me again. Time for some vendor communication. All right, first and foremost, let's chat expectations. It should be pretty straightforward that all communications with your vendors should be clear, but just to reiterate, all communication with your vendors should be clear, setting the tone, expectations, everything early on. Whether they're longtime vendors that you've used throughout your portfolio, first time you've worked with them or even heard of them, everything should be clear. What you're looking for, when do you need it by, how can they help make your life easier and make this project a success? Professional. Let's avoid being unprofessional. Yes, there's obvious items in there that we all know, but this can also include things like responding to questions timely, passive aggressive responses, like, per our previous discussion, yes, I need X, Y, and Z. Overusing unnecessary urgency. That's not their issue, right? We've got to work on planning a little bit better earlier on and make sure that we're giving everybody ample time. And let's also avoid being vague. We also want to make sure we're being consistent in our messaging across our vendors. If something changes, make sure everybody gets updated. If one vendor proposes an additional alternate because they think it's going to add value to the project, make sure you give the others the opportunity to weigh in with their thoughts and potentially provide the same scope if it's something that they're interested in doing. We want to make sure that our communication is also fair across the board. And this ties into a couple previous items, but keep in mind that things like giving a last look to one vendor or allowing one vendor to turn their bids in late while everybody else was kept to a hard deadline, not great practices. We also want to make sure communications are documented. Again, we've touched on this before, but it helps create accountability down the road. It's also going to make sure that everybody's on the same page throughout the entire process. Not every company uses the same terminology, and even if they do, they might not use it the exact same way. There's inconsistency across companies, across regions. Somebody who just moved here from a different part of the country might use the exact same words, but they might mean different things based on where they're at. Let's make sure that we're following up all verbal communications in writing so that nothing's misinterpreted, misremembered, or just flat out missed. What about throughout the process? Your communication with your vendors truly starts when you're creating your RFP. This is your opportunity to set the tone for the project overall. A poorly composed RFP can create a multitude of issues down the road, from bids that aren't comparable to missing scope to misaligned expectations or even worse. View this as your first interaction with the vendor, and it should get you started on the right path. Then, with your first true interaction with the vendor, make sure we're following all the previously noted expectations as far as communication goes. Keep in mind, it's far better to over-communicate early than to under-communicate. It's also important to watch your phrasing and what you're telling the vendors. Make sure there's no casual pre-bid promises that may affect the project or result in issues down the road. Make sure all initial communication is in writing to ensure that it's fair and consistent communication expectations have been met. We'll want to reiterate the timeline for submitting bids, when the job will be awarded, and when the project is expected to actually get completed. Then throughout the bid process, we'll make sure you're documenting all questions and answers in writing. If there's something that could reasonably affect another vendor, make sure you're passing that along to them as well, both the question and the answer. This is especially true if there was clarification needed for the scope. It's likely a good idea to include a site walk that's open to all the vendors, so questions and clarifications can be discussed together. Again, making sure we're following up in writing later on. Then, once the bids have all been submitted, acknowledge that you've received them and remind the vendors what the expected timeline is for the decision making. If there are changes to that timeline, communicate that out. Ideally, we're sticking to what we told them though. Once a decision has been made, make sure you communicate that to your chosen vendor. Let them know that they've won the project and you're preparing a contract. Once we get that contract in place, we'll need to get it executed so we can start with the not so fun part of post-project bid communication. It's equally important to close the loop with the other vendors who participated in the project and let them know that they were not selected. Make sure we thank them for being part of the process because they did take a lot of time and effort to put a number together for us. If it's appropriate, it would be a good idea to send constructive feedback to the vendors who are not ultimately selected. When you do this, make sure you avoid unnecessary detail because it can create a sort of back and forth or combativeness that we want to avoid. But phrases like, your bid was very competitive, we ultimately went with a different vendor due to their combination of both pricing and experience with the building system, should be all right. To avoid ending up in a situation where the selected vendor is no longer able to fulfill the expectations and you've got to go back to vendors you already told no, it's usually best to hold off on that second email until the first vendor has both communicated acceptance and executed a contract. Now, because of this, it's ideal that the timeline you communicate to your vendors takes this into account. Make sure that your initial review is expected to be completed a couple of days before you've told your vendors that they can expect to hear about the final decision. That way, everybody's on the same page and we're not in a situation where we've told one vendor but are keeping the other vendors in the dark for a significant amount of time.